Last week and this week and next week, we're having this sort of mini sermon series about the way of Jesus, the way that we are called to live as disciples of Christ. And this last week and this week both come from Luke's passage of Jesus' gospel and Jesus' sermon on the plain. It's this moment that parallels and reflects Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, but Luke goes to great lengths to say he went to a flat place with the people to give a different sort of perspective, as it were. But a lot of the teachings are very familiar because we hear them so often from Matthew's gospel. And the passage from the lectionary this week follows right on from the passage last week when Jesus blesses those who are poor and hungry and grieving, who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And Jesus curses those who are powerful and wealthy and filled and who are highly lauded by their friends and family and their community. Jesus, in that moment, sort of begins to shift the perspective of who it is that God most especially blesses and challenge our assumptions about how we should keep score in life. And this week's reading follows right on. And it really is a piece of the whole. It's a whole piece of cloth, right? It's not two separate pieces. But the way the lectionary breaks it up sometimes sheds a little light differently. Those blessings and curses that Jesus offers can sometimes sound on our ears like statuses or things that just have happened to us. Not anything that we necessarily choose to do. Most of us don't choose to be full. We do, but we don't think of it as an action that we've taken. It's just how things are. We don't think of ourselves as rich and powerful and wealthy. It's just that, well, we've worked hard. We've been careful and thoughtful about our investments and our savings. So you might read those blessings and curses as a statement about who we are, who we're called to be. But then Jesus continues speaking, and the things that he says are not about status or what the society around us says about who we are. It's about how we act, what we do. Not just in the big picture kind of way, but in some very specific kinds of circumstances. Somebody steals your coat, give them a shirt too. Somebody hits you across the face, turn your cheek to them and let them strike the other one. Somebody asks to borrow money, you give them everything you can and don't ask for anything back. Love the people who are out to get you. This is terrible advice by our world's standards. But Jesus is not interested in the world's standards. He's inviting us to see a new way of living, a different kind of kingdom, which is not predicated upon the power structures as they are. And it still, even 2,000 years, just strikes us as peculiar. I read, and I cannot remember who it was. It may have been Richard Rohr. I should write these things down so I remember them. Who said that advice to love your enemies and to bless those who persecute you, to turn the other cheek, to give without expecting return, to give a shirt over when somebody steals your coat, that they may be some of the most admired words in the world and some of the least practiced words of Jesus. Over and over again, we hear those words and we find ways to sort of, find the loopholes, to spiritualize them instead of acting on them, to make them about something other than what they are in their plainest, simplest reading and understanding. Jesus is calling us to live counter to the way the world functions. It only makes sense, doesn't it? If somebody hits you, that you should at least defend yourself or file a police report or something. If somebody steals from you, shouldn't you let the police know? Because they're going to steal from somebody else. If someone asks to borrow money, it only seems fair to ask them to pay back when they can. But Jesus is turning things upside down. Jesus, like us, lived in a world where power, social and economic and cultural and political power, was held by a very few people at the very top. And most people, most of the folks that Jesus knew had very little access to power, cultural or social or economic, political. Most of us live in a world that is structured that way. We all live in a world that's structured that way. Most of us, if we're honest, are not quite really at the bottom of that structure. We're not all the way at the top, but we aim more towards the top than we do at the bottom. We live in a world that empowers some people specifically by disempowering others. It's really not so different today than it was in Jesus' day. And if you refuse to live in a world with that kind of power structure and those kind of rules and the kind of ways of thinking and living that keep that power structure in place, if you live counter to that, the world thinks you're weird and will do everything it can to push you out, to reject you, to ignore you, to belittle you, to make fun of you, to dismiss you. Because you're living upside down, you're living weirdly, you're living not the way that everybody knows you're supposed to live. But what Jesus is trying to get us to see in this moment, in this teaching on that flat place, wherever it was in Luke's gospel, what Jesus wants us to hear is the same thing he wanted his followers to hear in those first days. And that is that the power of the world is upside down. And the reason that Jesus' teaching sounds so radical is because we've got it so wrong. That in a kingdom based on love, in a kingdom of radical welcome and hospitality for all people, in a kingdom where there is no king except love, things are very different than what we see around us. You may have seen in the news over the last few weeks news about Jeff Bezos. And there are moments when I think, yeah, I make fun of Jeff Bezos a lot, and I use him a lot. But I don't feel real bad for him, because honestly, he's like reaching supervillain levels of wealth and obscenity. The news over the last couple of weeks is that he's having himself a mega super amazing yacht built. I don't remember how many hundreds of millions or more that he spent on this giant boat that he will be on a few weeks a year at most, that costs millions a year to operate and pollutes at extraordinary levels just so he can feel a little better about himself or whatever it is. He's having this thing built in the Netherlands, And in order to get it from the shipyards out to the ocean, there's a bridge between the shipyards and the ocean, an old bridge, a beautiful bridge, a bridge that the people are rightfully proud of. He's having it disassembled so that his big, stupid boat can go out to the ocean. And he says he's going to have the bridge put back, and probably he will. But do you see that in a world where somebody builds a giant boat and disassembles a bridge so that they can enjoy their money a little bit more, while other people starve, that is what is upside down. That is what is broken. And the idea that unfettered capitalism is sanctified by God is a rotten, filthy lie. In a world where people have no safe place to call home, no one should have the kind of power and wealth that allows them to take vanity trips to outer space. This is not what God wants for our world. And if we live counter to that way of seeing and thinking, the world is going to say, you got it all wrong. You're out of step. This is not how you're supposed to. You get with the program. Don't be so naive. But Jesus is calling us to live in an upside down way because things are upside down. And it's only by living in alignment with love that we begin to see what is possible for God's world. The mission of the United Methodist Church, the whole denomination, is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And that sounds great. You can buy t-shirts and logos, and it's a good mission. I like the mission. It's a lovely statement. It's good. But what we often have ended up doing is making fans of some of the ideas of Jesus for the slight betterment of the world on occasion. And somehow that's less inspiring, but it's a whole lot easier to sell. But Jesus' vision is not about occasionally doing a little bit of something nice for somebody. It is about a radical reworking of what it means to live in love. And holy crap, is it hard? Because it is counter to the things that we've grown up hearing and knowing and believing and doing. But we are called to live in this upside-down way of Jesus, precisely because the world has gotten it so wrong. And we get it wrong over and over and over again. Yesterday, you may have not noted the anniversary, but I promise you that our Japanese-American siblings didn't. Because yesterday was the anniversary of President Roosevelt's signing of the executive order that stripped 120,000 Japanese-American citizens of this country of their civic rights and shipped them off to internment camps. This is upside down. This is not how God calls us to live. But there was power in the hands of a very few people who made an awful, evil decision. This is not God's kingdom. You also know that this is Black History Month. And our nation is rife with stories of awful, evil decisions being made by a handful of people in power to debase and devalue the lives of African American brothers and sisters, not only through the period of enslavement, but in the era of Jim Crow, and even today, when the color of your skin to a large degree still determines your access to power in our country, your access to economic advancement in our country, your access to voting rights in our country. This is not how God calls us to live. The world is upside down. The power of our world is upside down. And Jesus wants us to see another way and to work for another way. And holy cow, is it hard. And we cannot act with the world's tools and means to undo the work of the world. At the end of the section that Dave read for us this morning, there's this repeated statements about if you just loan out to the people who you know are going to repay you, you haven't changed anything. That's what the world does. If you love the people who love you, you haven't changed anything. That's already what the world does. If you act in ways that just become self-serving and perpetuating the way that everything works, you haven't changed anything. But if you love an enemy, you begin to change the way the world works. If you give to those who ask of you without expecting to be paid back, you begin to change the way that the world works. If you give your shirt to someone who steals a coat from you, you begin to change the way that the world works. If you speak out against injustice, and only with great love, even for those who are acting unjustly, you begin to change the way that the world works. We begin, even in small steps, a minute at a time, a millimeter at a time, to turn the world not upside down, but right way up. This is the call of the way of Jesus. And holy cow, is it hard. And it is costly. And it is who we are called to be. The world is upside down, and brothers and sisters, it is our call and our great privilege to be at work in the world, setting things right as we seek ourselves to live as God's kingdom and all that we do. And that, my friends, is the good news this day. Thanks be to God. Amen.